How dare you hang such ugly and irritating curtains? Why are you doing this? Because it is over. Tobi, your sister has started tormenting me again.
Please, you need to understand my sister. You know how she is.
How dare you come into my matrimonial room without knocking? How dare you talk to me in that tone? I will report you to my brother. Who do you think you are?
Amara heard the voice of the one person who is determined to make her marriage a living hell. It was on a Tuesday night in Lekki, 2 months into a marriage that had started with so much promise. A woman named Amara stood in her own living room and watched her husband's sister tear down a pair of curtains she had bought with her own money. She would call it the night everything changed completely. But to understand how it got there, we have to go back to a different Tuesday, 12 months earlier, in a city 400 kilometers away, when Amara was not yet anyone's wife and the name Adeyemi meant nothing to her at all. Amara had built her life in Enugu the way she built everything else. Carefully, with her own 2 hands, and without waiting for anyone's permission. Her mother, Mrs. Eze, would always taunt her about marriage by saying, "Amara, when am I meeting someone? You will turn this house into a museum of other people's weddings and forget to plan your own." Amara would laugh and change the subject, because the truth was that she had not been actively looking. Not because she didn't want a marriage, she did, eventually, the way most people want things they haven't found a reason to rush toward, but because the men she had dated in her 20s had each in their own way wanted a smaller version of her. A version that didn't have opinions about things or life. She had learnt by 28 that she would rather be alone and whole than matched and folded into something smaller. Which is, of course, exactly the frame of mind in which people tend to meet someone. It happened in Lagos on a humid Saturday in October at a wedding Amara had been hired to style. Not as the lead, but as part of a 3-person team brought in by a larger event company because the client, a wealthy family from Ikoyi, wanted the Enugu girl, who had done a viral wedding setup the year before. It was during the reception, while she was repositioning a centerpiece that a careless waiter had nearly knocked over, that a man in a navy suit leaned over and said, "I think you just saved that table's life." She looked up. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy, unhurried smile that belonged to someone who had never had to fight for anyone's attention, and therefore had no idea how rare that was. He introduced himself as Tobi Loba Adeyemi, and explained with visible pride that he was the best man's cousin, which seemed to Amara like a very roundabout way of being at a wedding, but she let it pass. "You did all this?" Tobi asked, gesturing at the room, the gold and ivory drapery, the floating candle centerpieces, the small forest of white orchids that Amara had personally argued the florist down to a reasonable price for. "With 2 other people, yes," Amara said, because she had learned early that taking full credit for team efforts was a fast way to lose a team. "It's the best wedding decor I've seen all year," Tobi said, "and I've been to a lot of weddings this year." He wasn't wrong to have been to a lot of weddings. Tobi was 33, a logistics manager at a freight and shipping company headquartered in Apapa. He asked for her number that night, not in the smooth, rehearsed way of men who asked everyone for their numbers, but almost shyly, as though he expected her to say no. She gave it to him, mostly because she was tired, and it seemed easier than explaining that she didn't usually do this, and because there was something in the way he'd said, "best wedding decor I've seen all year," that suggested he actually meant it. He called 2 days later, and by December, They were on the phone most nights, she in Enugu, he in Lagos, in the particular rhythm of a long-distance courtship that exists mostly in the in-between hours after work and before sleep, when two people are tired enough to be honest and awake enough to keep talking anyway. Tobi was, by every measure Amara could apply, a good man. Things were going smoothly and her mother approved of him. But even in those early months, in the gentle, golden period before anything had gone wrong, before Amara had any reason to be looking for warning signs, there was a name that came up more than any other name had any right to. Yewande. I should check with Yewande about the date, Tobi said when they were discussing a possible visit. She likes to know my schedule. Yewande thinks I should slow down on the suya, my cholesterol, he said another time, with the rueful affection of a man describing his doctor or mother, except Yewande was none. Yewande was his sister. My sister practically raised me, Tobi told Amara one night in the kind of tone people use when they are explaining something they consider both obvious and slightly sad. Amara, who had grown up with both her parents alive and well, and occasionally too involved in her business, heard this and felt something soften in her chest. It explained so much, she thought. The easy warmth in Tobi, the absence of the brittleness she'd noticed in some men who'd grown up with too much or too little attention. He often checked in with his sister. Of course, he was careful with her feelings. A boy who had lost his mother by 12 and been raised by his 20-year-old sister would naturally carry that bond differently than other men carry their sibling relationships. It did not occur to Amara, not yet, not in January, with the relationship still new and full of soft edges, that there might be a difference between a man who was grateful to his sister and a man whose sister had never been asked to stop being his mother. She met Yewande for the first time in March, on a visit to Lagos that Tobi had been quietly building toward for weeks. Yewande Adeyemi was 42, though she carried herself with the settled gravity of someone older. She ran a fabric stall in Balogun Market. Their first meeting went smoothly. So, Yewande said, after the introductions, after Tobi had practically vibrated from the effort to make the moment go smoothly, "You're the one styling all these big Lagos weddings." "I work on some of them, yes," Amara said. Yewande looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Tobi doesn't usually bring people to meet me. You should feel," she paused, choosing the word with visible care, "honored." Amara laughed a little uncertainly because it was the kind of sentence that could have been a joke or could have been entirely serious, and she genuinely could not tell which was which. Tobi laughed too quickly, in the way people laugh when they are hoping a moment will pass faster if they laugh at it. It passed, the afternoon continued, and Yewande was not warm exactly, but not unkind either. It was only on the drive to the airport the next morning when Tobi mentioned, almost as an afterthought, the way people mention things they've decided not to think too hard about, that Yewande had texted him 3 times the night before to ask what he really thought about Amara. That something in Amara's stomach tightened briefly, before she told herself it was nothing. Sisters worried about their brothers. That was normal. That was, if anything, a good sign, proof that Tobi came from a family that cared. By June, Tobi proposed. He did it in Enugu, at a small restaurant Amara's family had been going to for her birthday since she was a child, with her parents quietly informed in advance and her father pretending badly not to know what was coming. It was, Amara would say later, one of the only parts of the entire next year that went exactly the way it should have. The wedding planning that followed was where the first real cracks appeared, though at the time none of them looked like cracks. They looked like enthusiasm.
Yewande, it turned out, had opinions about everything. Amara had been leaning toward a soft sage and cream, drawing on her own professional eye, was gently but firmly redirected toward gold and burgundy, because Yewande explained, "Those are our family's colors. We've used them for every major event since Mama's time." The choice of caterer was a particular irony that Amara, with the perspective of hindsight, would find almost funny. Despite running her own event styling business, despite knowing exactly which vendors in Lagos could deliver, Amara found her own weddings catering contract going to a company Yewande had used for every important event in this family. A company whose food Amara privately thought was mediocre, but whose owner was apparently like a sister to Yewande. Each time, Tobi's response was the same. Not a refusal, never a refusal. Tobi was incapable of refusing anyone anything to their face, but a gentle, reasonable-sounding redirection. It's not a big deal, is it? It would mean a lot to her. She's been so excited about this. It's the first wedding in the family since Dad's. You know, the one with... And here he would gesture vaguely, never quite finishing the sentence about his father's second marriage, which Amara had learned was a subject the family circled rather than approached. Amara, for her part, did what brides under pressure from in-laws have done for generations. She picked her battles, told herself it didn't matter, and reminded herself that a wedding was one day and a marriage was the rest of her life. And surely the rest of her life would look different. Her mother was less convinced. Amara, Mrs. Eze said on the phone one evening in the careful tone she used when she was about to say something her daughter might not want to hear. This sister of his, is she planning your wedding or is she planning her own? Mommy, it's not like that. She's excited. She raised him, you know, after their mother died. I know you've told me. I'm not saying she's a bad woman. Mommy paused. I'm saying when a man's sister is more excited about his wedding than the man himself, sometimes it's worth asking why. Not about her, about him, about what he's used to. Amara laughed it off, gently, the way you laugh off something that landed closer than you'd like to admit. Mommy, you worry too much. Tobi loves me, that's not in question. I didn't ask if he loves you. I asked what he's used to. At their wedding day, 240 guests filled the hall. Amara wore the dress she dreamt about since she was a girl, and when she walked down the aisle, she saw Tobi's face do the thing that faces do in films and almost never do in real life. A kind of helpless, undefended joy. And for a moment, every small doubt she carried through the planning simply evaporated. This was what it was about. The reception included, as Nigerian weddings do, a sequence of toasts and tributes from Amara's father, from Tobi's best man, from assorted aunties whose relationship to the couple was never fully clarified, but whose enthusiasm was total. And then, toward the end of the formal program, the MC announced a tribute from the woman who has been more than a sister to our groom, the woman who has been in every sense that matters, his mother. Yewande walked to the front in a burgundy lace gele that coordinated, Amara noticed, suspiciously well with the wedding colors, as though she had known the palette before it was officially chosen, which Amara realized with a small jolt she probably had since she'd been the one to choose it. The speech began conventionally enough. For 21 years, I have been the one Tobi calls when something is wrong. The one who knows how he likes his food, what makes him laugh, what he needs when he's had a hard day. That's a big job. She paused and smiled, and the smile did not reach the part of her face it should have. I'm praying that Amara is ready to learn how to do all of that too, because Tobi deserves someone who can take care of him the way he's always been taken care of. The room applauded. It was, on its face, a generous statement, a kind of passing of the torch, the kind of thing elder sisters say at weddings all the time. Amara smiled and clapped and felt 240 people's eyes move briefly to her, assessing the way Yewande herself had assessed her back in March. Only later, in the car on the way to their hotel for the first night of their marriage, with her shoes off and her feet aching and her husband's hand warm around hers, she turned the sentence over in her mind and noticed what it actually said. Not congratulations, not welcome to the family. A test. Are you ready to learn how to do my job? She didn't mention it to Tobi. It was their wedding night. There would be time, she thought, for everything else. They spent 4 days in a hotel in Victoria Island, not a honeymoon abroad, which they'd agreed to save for the following year when Tobi's annual leave aligned better, but 4 days that felt to Amara like the truest version of what marriage might be. Room service breakfasts, long, lazy afternoons, the particular, almost giddy disbelief of waking up with someone and realizing this was now simply true every day for the rest of your life. On the 5th day, they moved into the apartment, a 2-bedroom unit in a gated estate in Lekki that Tobi had been renting for 2 years and that Amara had visited only twice before the wedding, both times briefly. It was a good apartment. She fell asleep that night, their first full night in their own home, thinking about paint colors for the second room. Something warm, something that was hers. The phone rang at 7:40 the next morning. Tobi answered it before he was fully awake, the particular reflex of someone whose phone had rung at that hour for that caller many times before. Amara, half asleep beside him, heard only his side of the conversation, heard him say good morning in the soft, instantly attentive voice she hadn't yet heard him use with anyone else, heard him laugh at something, heard him say, of course, you don't even need to ask, and then heard him put the phone down and turn to her with an expression of such simple, unguarded relief that for a moment she thought he was about to tell her something wonderful. That was Yewande, he said. She said she's been thinking, with you new to Lagos and starting your business, she should help you settle down fully for a few days. Few days became 3 weeks, and 3 weeks became something Amara would spend years trying to find the right word for. Yewande arrived on a Thursday morning with 1 bag. By Thursday evening, she had 4. By Friday, a man Amara had never seen before brought in more of her things, occupying the room Amara already had plans for. Just temporary, she said, watching the wardrobe go through the door. No point unpacking a small bag every 2 weeks when I can keep my things here properly. Amara looked at Tobi. Tobi looked at his phone. By the following Monday, the kitchen had a new arrangement. Amara came home to find the pot she had organized on Saturday rearranged entirely, her spice rack relocated to a cupboard above the fridge that she couldn't reach with a stool, and a pot of egusi soup on the stove that she had not made. I started dinner, she said, not looking up from her phone. You were out so long, I didn't want Tobi to come home to nothing. I was working, Amara said. I know, she smiled. That's why I helped. The next meal Amara prepared, Yewande tasted it before Tobi sat down, tasted it from the 7 spoon in front of both of them without asking. She said. It's missing salt, Tobi tasted. Tobi tasted it. It's fine actually, he said, and for 1 second Amara felt something in her chest unclench. It's missing salt, Yewande repeated, this time more slowly, and the second time Tobi reached for the salt. That was the night Amara learned the rule that would govern the next 6 months of her life. It didn't matter what was true, it only mattered what Yewande said, twice.
By the 2nd week, Amara had stopped cooking from scratch most days. It felt safer to follow Yewande's recipes, in Yewande's quantities, with Yewande standing at the kitchen door offering corrections Amara hadn't asked for. She told herself this was temporary, a courtesy while Yewande was still settling them in, whatever that meant for a marriage that was technically already settled. The car incident happened on the 3rd Saturday. They were going to the cinema, the first real date Amara and Tobi had managed since the wedding, just the 2 of them, something Amara had been looking forward to all week. Tobi came downstairs with his keys already in hand, and Yewande was right behind him, dressed and ready, holding her handbag. Yewande is coming, Tobi said, in the breezy tone of a man announcing something he had already decided wasn't worth discussing. In the car, Yewande got into the front seat before Amara had even reached the door. Amara stood there for a moment, on a Saturday evening, in a car park, in front of her own husband, working out whether this was actually happening. Then she opened the back door and got in, because the alternative was standing in the car park having an argument in front of the security guard, and because some small, exhausted part of her had already started doing the math of which battles were winnable. At the mall, Yewande chose the movie. At the snack counter, Yewande ordered her all of them, Tobi's usual, her own, and for Amara, popcorn without the extra butter Amara always asked for, because it's bad for the skin and you are trying to glow for your husband, no? Amara sat through the film without seeing a single scene of it. She was doing arithmetic. 21 days married, 14 days of Yewande in the house, 0 days so far where anyone had asked Amara what she wanted and gotten the answer she had actually given. That night, after Yewande had gone to bed, Amara sat on the edge of the bed and said, quietly, "Tobi, I need to talk to you about something." "Of course," he said, and turned off his phone and looked at her with the same open, attentive face that had made her fall for him in the first place. And for a moment, Amara let herself hope. She told him, carefully, without accusation, the way she had rehearsed it in the car. The salt, the seating, the spice rack. She told him she felt like a guest in her own home. Tobi listened. He nodded in the right places, and when she finished, he took her hand and said, "I hear you, I do, and I'll talk to her." He talked to her the next morning. Amara heard the conversation through the bedroom wall, heard Tobi's voice, low and apologetic, heard Yewande's voice rise sharp, then break slightly into something that sounded almost like tears, and heard Tobi's voice get softer and softer until by the end of it, it was Tobi apologizing. "She just feels like she's not wanted here," Tobi told Amara afterwards, looking genuinely troubled, genuinely torn, in a way that made it almost impossible for Amara to be angry at him specifically, because he so clearly believed he had done something. "She said she'll try to give us more space. I think she just needs to feel included, with everything she's been through." Nothing changed. If anything, the next week was worse, because now Yewande knew that Amara had complained, and every small correction came with an undertone, a faint emphasis, a look that said, "I know what you said about me." It was in week 4 that Amara found the bank statement. She wasn't looking for it. She was looking for the Wi-Fi router password, which Tobi kept written on the back of an old statement in the drawer of the side table. And the statement she pulled out wasn't the one with the Wi-Fi password. It was 3 months old, and it was Tobi's. And on it, on the 15th of every month, going back at least 6 months, was a transfer of 250,000 naira to an account listed simply as Y.A. Adeyemi Balogun. 250,000 naira every month to his sister. Amara sat with that number for a long time. She did the math on Tobi's salary, which she knew roughly because they discussed finances honestly before the wedding, or so she had thought. 250,000 naira a month was not helping out. It was close to a third of his take-home pay. It was, Amara realized, with a slow, cold feeling, very possibly more than Yewande's fabric store brought in on a bad month, which would mean Yewande was not just being supported, she was being funded by a brother whose new wife had been told before the wedding that their joint finances would be simple, just the two of us, building together. That evening, Amara asked Tobi about it directly. Calmly, she thought, though her hands were not quite steady. "That's family stuff," Tobi said. And for the first time since Amara had known him, she watched him become evasive, his eyes going to the door, to his phone, anywhere but her face. "It's been like that for years, since before you. It's not new. It's 250,000 naira a month, Tobi. We talked about our budget. You told me what was coming in and what was going out, and this wasn't on the list. It's complicated. She helped raise me. This is just," he exhaled, "this is just how it's always been. I can't just stop it." "I'm not asking you to stop helping your sister," Amara said, and her voice was very even now, very careful. "I'm asking why I wasn't told. I'm asking what else wasn't on the list."
Tobi didn't answer that, and in the silence where an answer should have been, Amara understood for the first time with total clarity that this was not a misunderstanding she could fix with a calm conversation. This was an arrangement, one that existed long before she did, that had its own rules, its own budget, its own claim on her husband, and that nobody had thought to mention it to her wasn't an oversight. It was because in this house, she wasn't the one who needed to be told things. She was the one things got decided around. That night, lying awake next to a husband who had already fallen asleep, easily, the way people sleep when they've decided a problem is someone else's to carry, Amara made a decision. Not the decision everyone, including Tobi, including Yewande, including her own mother on the phone the next day, would expect her to make. She did not pack a bag. She did not call her mother to come and get her. Instead, at 6 a.m. the next morning, before Yewande was awake, before Tobi had left for work, Amara got up, made a pot of tea, sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook, and began to write a list. Not a list of grievances, a list of facts. The transfer dates, the amounts, the names of the 3 clients Amara's table had lost in Lagos in the last month. Clients who had, Amara now strongly suspected, been quietly warned off by a woman with deep connections in the same churches and markets where those clients shopped. The names of 2 people Yewande had introduced as family friends, who had, Amara now realized, been sized up on 3 separate occasions as possible better matches for Tobi. Comments dressed as compliments, made just loud enough for Amara to hear. And one more thing, a name Yewande mentioned twice in passing with a small private smile both times, Folake. By the time Tobi left for work that morning, kissing Amara's forehead on his way out, telling her to have a good day, things will settle, I promise, Amara had already made 3 phone calls. One to Chidinma, her best friend, who lived 40 minutes away in Yaba, and who Amara learned had been waiting for this call for weeks. One to Toju, a former colleague from Enugu, who now works in compliance at one of the big Lagos banks, and who owed Amara a favor from university that Amara had never once called in. And one, the shortest call, and the one that would matter most, to a number Yewande herself had given her weeks ago, written on the back of a fabric receipt with a smile Amara had not understood the meaning of at the time. The number for Folake. Yewande came downstairs at 8, expecting the kitchen to smell like whatever breakfast Amara had been quietly trained to make. Instead, she found Amara already dressed, makeup done, a small overnight bag by the door, the first time Amara had packed anything since the wedding. Going somewhere? Yewande asked, with the faint satisfaction of a woman who has decided in advance what the answer must be. Lagos Island, Amara said pleasantly, picking her car keys. Keys to a car Tobi had, in fact, put fully in her name, something Yewande did not know. Meeting a friend for breakfast. Yewande turned toward the kitchen. Tell Tobi I'll have dinner ready by the time he's back. Soup, the right amount of salt this time. Amara paused at the door and smiled. A small, genuine, almost peaceful smile. The kind of smile that had Yewande been paying closer attention might have worried her considerably. That's so kind of you. But don't trouble yourself tonight. I think it's going to be a long evening for everyone. She closed the door behind her before Yewande could ask what that meant. In the car, pulling out of the estate, Amara called the first number on her list. Folake, she said when the call connected. Hi, this is Amara, Tobi's wife. I think it's time we finally met properly. I have a feeling we have a lot to talk about, and I think between the 2 of us, we might know more about Yewande Adeyemi than Yewande thinks anyone knows. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then, to Amara's complete surprise, Folake laughed. Not a bitter laugh, a relieved one. Amara, I have been waiting 2 years for someone to call me about that woman. Where do you want to meet? Folake was already seated when Amara arrived at the small cafe in Ikoyi. A slim woman in her 30s with the kind of composed, watchful stillness of someone who had spent a long time being underestimated and had learned to use it. You look surprised, Folake said when Amara sat down. Did Yewande tell you I was the crazy one? The one Tobi almost married before he came to his senses? Something like that, Amara admitted.
That's the story she tells everyone, Folake said. She slid her phone across the table. Here's the part she leaves out. On the screen were a string of old messages, 2 years old, the timestamp still visible. Yewande's number, saved under a name Folake had labeled simply her. You need to end things with Tobi. He's not ready for marriage. I know my brother better than he knows himself. If you push this, you will regret it. I have already spoken to your auntie about some things from your past. She didn't know. Now she does. Don't make me say this twice, Folake. Amara read it twice and felt something cold settle into place. She didn't think he was ready for marriage, Folake said quietly. She thought no one was ready for him. Because if he married someone, that someone would need a room. And there's only one extra room in that apartment, Amara. I'd bet my stall on the fact that she's already living in it. She is, Amara said. Then you're not the first woman she's done this to. You're just the one who didn't leave fast enough for her to win quietly. Folake leant back. I left. I was 26 and my family was respectable, and I didn't want a war with my mother-in-law's favorite child before I'd even had a wedding. So I left, and Yewande told everyone I was unstable. 2 years later, here we are. Why are you helping me now? Folake smiled, the first real smile Amara had seen from her. Because you didn't run, you called. Nobody's ever called before. By 11 a.m., Amara's phone had 3 new messages. The first was from Toju, her friend at the bank. A screenshot, blurred at the edges for compliance reasons, but unmistakable. A second account, also in Yewande's name, into which a different set of transfers had been arriving for the past 8 months. Not from Tobi. From Mr. Adeyemi Sr., the father in Ibadan, the one Tobi described as distant, remarried, barely in touch. 8 months of transfers, smaller than Tobi's, but regular, with a memo line on each one that read simply, for keeping the matter quiet. The second message was from Femi, Tobi's cousin, who Amara hadn't even called. Chidimma had. Femi's message was short, and Amara took a full minute to understand what she was looking at.
Amara, I don't know how to say this, except to just say it. Yewande's engagement to Kunle wasn't broken off because of Mama's death. I was there. I was 15. I remember it clearly because nobody ever talks about it. Kunle broke it off himself 2 months before Mama died because Yewande had been telling people in the family that Kunle was already promised to her cousin, instead, behind his back, to control who he'd end up with. He found out. He left. Mama's death came after, and Yewande just folded the story into that. Easier to be the tragic sister who sacrificed everything than the woman whose own fiancé ran from her. Dad's payments. I think I know what that's about too. There's no shameful secret from 20 years ago that needs covering up, Amara. I think Yewande told Dad there was one. Something about how Mama really died. Dad's been paying to keep a story quiet that I don't think is even true. He's been afraid of his own daughter for 20 years, and Tobi doesn't know he and Yewande has different father. Amara put the phone down on the cafe table and sat very still. Every piece of this, the curtains that hadn't even been bought yet, the soup, the front seat, the 250,000 naira, the warnings to clients, the comments about Folake, every piece of it had felt individually like the behavior of an overbearing sister. Together, laid out on a cafe table at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, it was something else entirely. It was a 22-year operation, and Amara was not the target. She was simply the latest person standing in her way. The third message was from Chidimma, and it was 4 words long. Tobi just called Yewande Mom. Chidimma had gone to the apartment, Amara's idea, sent an hour earlier, a single text. Go and sit with Yewande. Tell her you are worried about me, that I seemed upset this morning. Just listen. And Chidimma, who had spent 3 years in HR mediating just this kind of situation and never once gotten to enjoy it this much, had sat in Amara's living room and listened to Yewande, certain that her brother's wife was finally about to be dealt with, relaxed enough to talk. He calls me Mom sometimes, Yewande said, almost fondly, not realizing what she was admitting to a stranger. Slip of the tongue. 21 years, what do you expect? Amara will learn. They always learn eventually that some things in this house were decided before she arrived and some things will stay decided after. They always learn. Plural. Chidinma typed that part out word for word because she knew Amara would need to read it exactly as it was said. Amara drove home at 4 p.m. She had spent the day building something, piece by piece, the way she built event spaces. Not with anger, but with precision, with the calm of someone who knew exactly where every element needed to go before the room could come together. Tobi's car was already in the compound. He was home early. She found him in the living room with Yewande and the soup, the right amount of salt soup, sitting on the table, untouched, because Yewande had been talking animatedly about Amara's strange morning, about the overnight bag, and how maybe it's good if she goes home for a few days, Tobi, to think about whether she can really adjust to this family. Amara, Tobi said, standing up too fast, guilt written across his whole face before he'd said a single word. Yewande was just... I know what Yewande was saying. I've heard versions of it for 6 months. She set her phone down on the table, screen up, opened to Femi's message, then her overnight bag, which she had carried out that morning for entirely different reasons than anyone in that room assumed, and from it, a folder, printed bank statements, the screenshot from Toju, a photograph Folake had given her, 20 years old, of a young Yewande and a young man named Kunle, laughing at an engagement party that, according to the date on the back, had taken place 2 months before Mama Bukala Adeyemi died. Sit down, Tobi, both of you, because I think this family has been telling each other the wrong story for 22 years, and today it stops. What followed was not an argument. Arguments require 2 people defending positions. This was something else. Amara speaking, calmly, methodically, while Yewande's face went through more changes in 15 minutes than Amara had seen it make in 6 months. And Tobi sat between them, holding the photograph of Kunle with hands that had started faintly to shake. The 250,000 naira a month, the second account, fed by their father, afraid for 2 decades of a secret that Femi now believes had never existed at all, invented by a 20-year-old who had just lost her engagement and discovered in the chaos of her mother's death 3 months later that grief was a kind of power nobody questioned. The clients lost. The family friends who'd been quietly auditioned as better wives for Tobi. The word mom. 22 years, Tobi. 22 years, your sister has been the most important woman in this house, and every single person around her, her father, who you don't know about, you, probably half of Balogun Market, has been too afraid, or too grateful, or too guilty to ever ask whether that was actually true, or whether it was just the story she needed to be true, so she'd never be alone with what Kunle did. That's not, Yewande started. I have his photo, Yewande. I have the dates. I have Femi, who was 15 and remembers everything, because 15-year-olds always do. And I have your text to Folake, where you didn't sound like a grieving sister protecting her brother. You sounded like someone protecting a room in an apartment. She put the folder down. She walked over to Yewande, who flinched visibly, bracing for something, and she sat down beside her. I'm not here to destroy you, Amara said quietly. I could. I have enough between Folake and Femi and these statements to make the next family gathering very short and very ugly, and some small, tired part of me, after 6 months of soup and sitting arrangements, would enjoy that. But that's not why I came home today. She turned to face Yewande directly. I came home because I'm not leaving. Not this house, not this marriage, and not this family. But Yewande, the woman who's been running this house for 22 years, the one Tobi calls mom, the one who decides what is salted and who sits where and which wives get to stay, she doesn't get to live here anymore. Not because I'm throwing you out onto the street. Femi already found a place, 2 streets from here actually, close enough that Tobi can see you every week the way a brother should see his sister. Far enough that you stop being the landlord of a marriage that isn't yours. Tobi, Yewande turned to her brother, and for the first time in 6 months, her voice cracked. Not performed, not strategic, just cracked. The way a person's voice cracks when the only script they've ever known is suddenly taken away. Tobi, tell her.
And this was the moment. The one Amara had built the entire day toward. The one she could not have engineered, could not have controlled, and had, if she was honest, not been entirely sure would go the way she needed it to. Tobi looked at his sister, and then he looked at the photograph in his hands. Yewande at 20, laughing, in love, 3 months before a single lie reshaped both their lives. And something in his face Amara had never seen before settled into place. "Yewande," he said, and his voice was gentle and final, in a way it had never been in 6 months of gentle, unfinal sentences. "I've spent my whole life being grateful to you. I think I let that gratitude become a debt I was never allowed to finish paying. And I think you let it become that too, because somewhere in the last 22 years, you stopped being my sister and started being someone I was afraid of disappointing. That's not fair to either of us, and it's definitely not fair to my wife." He stood, walked to the window, and was quiet for a moment. "Femi will help you move this weekend," he said. "I'll cover the rent for a year, no conditions, because you're still my sister, and I still owe you for a childhood I couldn't have survived without you. But you won't live in my house, and you won't decide who does." Yewande did not scream. She did not throw anything. She sat very still for a long moment, the stillness of someone doing, perhaps for the first time in 22 years, an honest piece of math about her own life. And then she stood, picked up her bag from beside the sofa, and walked to the second bedroom to begin, quietly, to pack. Nobody followed her. Amara, watching her go, felt something she hadn't expected to feel at all. Not triumph, something closer to recognition. A woman who had spent 22 years making sure she was never, ever the one left behind, and who had just discovered in the space of one afternoon that being needed and being loved had never been the same thing, and that she had built an entire life out of confusing the two. That night, Amara and Tobi sat on the floor of the living room. "I don't know how to apologize for 6 months." "You don't. You apologize for the next 60 years, one boundary at a time." He nodded, and then, carefully, like a man diffusing something, he said, "The curtains, the ones you bought this morning before all of this, did you actually buy curtains?" Amara laughed, really laughed for the first time in weeks, and pulled a bag out from behind the sofa, where it had been sitting, forgotten, since 7 a.m. They hung the curtains together that night, soft gold, the same shade Amara had wanted from the beginning, before anyone else's opinion had ever been allowed into the room. Nobody pulled them down. Nobody tasted anything and said it needed more salt. The apartment was, for the first time since the wedding, simply theirs. 2 people, 1 home, and a door to the second bedroom that by the following weekend would finally, properly become Amara's office. A marriage is a room with exactly 2 names on the list. Anyone else who moves in, a mother, a sister, a best friend, just for 2 weeks, moves in as a guest, and a guest does not get to rearrange the furniture, taste the soup, or decide who sits in front. A man who cannot draw a line between the family that raised him and the family he is building will eventually force someone else to draw it for him, and by the time that happens, it is usually too late to draw it gently. And a woman should never mistake patience for peace. Amara spent 6 months being patient. It nearly cost her the marriage. What saved it wasn't leaving, and it wasn't staying quiet. It was the morning she stopped being patient and started being precise. A sister is a sister. A wife is a wife. They are not in competition because they were never supposed to be playing the same position. And any man who lets one of them be benched so the other can play both will sooner or later lose the game entirely.